It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
What we are trying to do is re-emphasise that sex in the law means biological sex.
The Conservatives promised to rewrite equalities legislation to protect women-only spaces. But what does that mean? Also today, Keir Starmer tries to put the focus on defence and security.
This Labour Party is totally committed to the security of our nation, to our armed forces, and, importantly, to our nuclear deterrent.
Meanwhile, Diane Abbott says she will run as a Labour candidate. Will it draw a line under the row? The last election was all about Brexit. Why aren't the parties talking about it this time? And TV debates kick off this week. Will they change anything? Joining us today, Business Secretary and Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch, Shadow Secretary of State for Health and Social Care Wes Streeting, Kate Andrews of The Spectator, and author and former Labour advisor Tom Baldwin. This is Politics Live Election 2024. Welcome to viewers on BBC Two, BBC iPlayer and BBC News. Let's start with this headline you heard also at the top of the programme. BBC announces dates for election TV debates. Yes, the first programme is this Friday evening. 7 parties have been invited. There's a question time debate on the 20th of June with the country's 4 largest parties and a debate between the Prime Minister head-to-head and the Labour leader Keir Starmer on the 26th of June. Now, as well as the BBC election debates, STV are also holding a televised debate in Scotland this evening, and ITV hosting the first head-to-head debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer tomorrow. Wow, that was exhausting. Let's start with this opening question. Kemi Badenoch, will they change anything?
Will the debates change anything? Debates can change things. I remember when I first did as a candidate back in 2010, and I agree with Nick, debates, I think, actually very much changed the dynamic of that election.
They did.
I think it is a format that will be better for Rishi Sunak in particular. When you look at PMQs, it is a bit argy-bargy, and the nature of the short questions and short answers means that it can look a bit more Punch and Judy. But I think in a proper debate where it's just the two of them, there's no MPs on the sidelines, making jokes and so on. I think we will see a side of the Prime Minister that we haven't seen.
Well, that's the head-to-head debates. Will they change anything, Wes?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, I think that the usefulness of the debates is it does confront voters with the choice. And the choice at this election is, do people want to give the matches back to the arsonist to finish the job, or do they want to look to the firefighters and the Labour Party and offer the change the country needs? I think Rishi Sunak's probably glad to be away from Prime Minister's questions, because when you look at the miserable faces sat behind him, it's a reminder that this is Liz Truss's Conservative Party. He's just living in it rather than leading it. Whereas with Keir Starmer, you've got a changed Labour Party that is able to now offer the change our country needs and wants, I believe, but we'll find that out too.
I mean, the reason I'm asking this question is because the polls so far in this campaign haven't really changed. If we show you the BBC's poll tracker, it says general election voting intention, and the Conservatives have been behind Labour by about 20 points or so for quite some time. So again, do you think the debates will change anything?
They could. We're going to have to see. Rishi Sunak will want every opportunity to close this gap, and he'll want every debate moment he can have. Keir Starmer will want to be speaking to voters, but will also not want any moment that can change the circumstances. I will say this is really an American import, these TV debates, and we only tend to have 3, so 6 is really quite something.
Tom?
Debates matter more to the party that's losing than the party that's winning, because you're looking for something that changes the narrative. So I suspect we might get, after the first debate, Sunak's done better than expected because expectations have been quite low. And people will seize on that and say it's beginning to be a Rishi Sunak fight back. The truth is, however, anything less than a knockout blow, I think, is a win for Starmer. And Starmer's approach to this, having spoken to him and his aides last week, will be no drama Starmer. It's like you don't need to look for some sort of haymaker. You don't need to change the narrative. You just need to keep it calm and measured, and that's what I think he'll do.
Well, of course, that is the head-to-head debate. The debate on Friday is with 7 parties, and it is the parties who are invited to take part. Usually the party leaders are the ones who come forward, but not necessarily. Kemi Badenoch, should it be Rishi Sunak who takes part on Friday?
Well, I haven't seen the exact format and description for Friday. It's the head-to-head debates, like the one happening tomorrow, that I've been focused on.
Sure.
That will be a matter. That will be a matter for him. We are a broad team. It may be that someone else might be best placed. The Prime Minister is doing quite a lot of campaigning. He's getting everywhere. So I don't know what is going to be planned.
I mean, if you were asked to take part on Friday, could it be you?
I'm very happy to take part in debates, but obviously it all has to fit in with a busy schedule. The key thing is that people get to hear what the offer is. And Wes has given a very scripted, blah, 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 Liz Truss, etc., arsonist. I've read these lines everywhere. They're just the Labour top lines. The truth is, actually, this is... No, they're not. And the truth is, what we are going to see is the offer, which you do describe, whether it is the status quo and continuity with a party that has a plan, or change for the worse.
Right.
And that's basically what you will see during the debate.
Should Keir Starmer take part in the 1+7 debate? They were done in the last election. Should it be Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, or again, could it be you?
Oh, I'd be well up for it. I love this sort of format. I would be well up for it. So yeah, there's an offer to the press team.
Well, we're seeing pictures there of the 2019 1+7.
I think that the challenge. Because I remember from the last election, the sort of and there you can see Rishi was the Conservative spokesperson last time. I think the advantage of the head-to-head with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak is these are the candidates for Prime Minister. That multi-party debate, and I say this with respect to the smaller parties, who and you know they have a right to make their case. I'm glad that format's there. They're not candidates for Prime Minister, and so therefore, you know, I'd be comfortable whether it's us or the Conservatives with the 2 main parties fielding different spokespeople. Partly as well because in our case we want to show the strength of our team, and you know you've got Rachel Reeves as Shadow Chancellor that we're putting forward. We've got a whole shadow cabinet of people that we feel confident putting forward to the country as an alternative cabinet. So there's an advantage there, I think, of showing that it's not just Keir Starmer who's changed the Labour Party. There is a changed team that's able to offer the change our country needs.
Do you think it's been a bit too presidential so far with Rishi Sunak standing alone at the bus campaign launch, for example, rather than the team that Keir Starmer has been fielding? Or is that his strength?
Well, you'll see that the very first thing we did was a campaign rally that had the whole cabinet behind him. But obviously this was also a snap election and there's all sorts of admin that's been taking place. We've also been going out to help other candidates in their constituencies. So you will see more. You will see more of the cabinet. We're still doing our day jobs. I'm still Secretary of Business and Trade. There is still all that work going on behind the scenes, which we have to keep away from the election.
So you hadn't been kept under wraps until now, then?
No. This is SW1 media gossip.
No,
just let me finish.
Sorry, Kevin.
We still have a lot of day job work to do. Wes, like I am no longer MP, so they're free to go out completely campaigning, and that's one of the reasons why.
Because I've mainly seen the cabinet campaigning for each other. Because I think they're, you know, quite vulnerable at this election.
No, it's because we're friends and we support each other.
Well,
we don't have the issues that you have, where Diane Abbott literally posted something on Twitter and had to delete it.
We're going to remember the last.
We're going to get onto that while it remains.
I don't think you're in a position to be.
I don't think you're one big happy family. But if you did do the leadership debates for this general election, it's good preparation for the Conservative leadership election, the other side, isn't it?
Well, Wes, are you the interviewer? I think Jo is.
Oh, sorry, yes,
I know
quite right. Sorry,
I know you want to shift the conversation away from
Jo.
policies onto me, but that's not really what...
Or maybe this is the dress rehearsal for Friday, if both of you take part instead of your leaders. But anyway, now you can get involved in the BBC's debates. If you have a question to put to the politicians, you can get in touch. Email have your say at bbc.co.uk or get in touch via the BBC News website. Now, we're going to catch up with our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who is on the campaign trail with the Prime Minister. Hello to you, Helen. What's been happening and where are you, or where have you been?
Well, we are in the southeast today in Oxfordshire. I'm afraid that's all I can tell you at this point, Jo, because of the way that these visits work and security issues and things. I'm afraid that is all I can tell you for now, but that is where we are, and the Prime Minister is on the campaign trail in Oxfordshire.
And what's been the focus today?
Well, today the policy focus for the Conservatives is around this policy they've announced to amend the Equality Act. So the Conservatives are framing this as a sort of a clearing up exercise, if you will, and it's to do with the Equality Act, which of course provides legal protections to people on the basis of certain protected characteristics, things like age, race and also sex. And what the Conservatives are saying is that they will amend the Act to make it clear that sex means biological sex, because it is, they say at this moment, open to interpretation. They believe that that is the original intention of the Act and that that is what they are going to amend it to do. And they say that the meaning of sex has evolved over time, and that's why a change in the law is needed, and it will give greater legal protection to people who run single-sex spaces, for example, and they talk about things like hospital wards and rape crisis centres. The other thing that they would do with this legislation is to make it a reserved matter for Westminster, so it will be Westminster that decides on these things, which of course could also be quite an interesting way to go on this. So that is what they are putting forward. They have, of course, in the past been criticised for stoking up division on this issue, and today the Liberal Democrats are saying that they are waging a phony culture war. Labour is not saying it would change the Act. It says that it would be looking to provide better guidance to people about this. But of course, while the Conservatives are saying this is about tidying up the Act, making it clearer for people and making it easier, they will of course be aware that this is an issue that has been a bit of a sore spot for other parties, in particular Labour and the SNP, and I think they won't be unhappy for that perhaps to be poked.
Helen Catt there with the Prime Minister on the campaign trail. Well, of course, luckily, we have Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, here. The Tory plan to amend the Equalities Act to specify that sex, which is a protected characteristic, means biological sex. Are you changing the law or are you clarifying what already exists?
It is a change that will result in a clarification because the word biological is not there. So we have to amend via primary legislation. But this is just making even clearer that the original intention of the Act was that sex should be a protected characteristic that is biological. That is why there are exemptions, even within the Act, on single-sex spaces and so on.
Right. So you are going to reopen the Equalities Act of 2010? Mm-hmm. Right, you're going to open this so anybody could put down their own amendments. They could chew over this whole major piece of legislation that was done in 2010.
That is not the way that we are planning to do it. So I've actually been working on this for quite a while. It was interrupted by the SNP gender recognition bill. There was a lot of work that was required, a court case and so on. But if we just go back to why the confusion has become more apparent, there has been a court case. Labour's policy on guidance is not going to work because there's been a court case, the Haldane judgment with 4 women in Scotland, which said that legal sex is what the language in the Equality Act means. And so we need to bring that clarification in. It's very, very arcane, it's very technical, a lot of people don't understand, and that's why we have so many of these very divisive debates, lots of people making all sorts of accusations. We want to bring more light and less heat into the issue.
Right. I mean, do you agree with what's being proposed here, Wes?
So, yeah, as Kemi said, when the last Labour government introduced the Equality Act, the intention was for sex to relate to biological sex and for the distinction to be made with gender and gender identity, and to recognise both of those things as protected characteristics. And as with other areas of the law, there might be times where those two things rub up against each other and we have to find a way through. And same-sex marriage was a really good example where we found a way through in that conflict between the same-sex marriage rights of gay people and religious groups who might say, well, that's not in accordance with the tenets of our faith. So we found a way through that maybe not everyone loved, but everyone could live with, and there's a compromise. Where I'm not clear is why changes to primary legislation is needed and not guidance.
Kemi?
Because of the court case. So the Haldane judgment has made that absolutely necessary. This was one of the things that we had to go through when we were stopping the SNP from doing what they did in Scotland. That's why the second part of it is about making this a reserved matter, because what you can't have is people having one status in England and a different status in Scotland. We are one country, and it is important that we have a uniform approach to these issues.
Yeah, so just on this point about the union, I mean, this is where I think we've got to tread very carefully, because I would much rather an approach where the UK government said, if there are tensions with particular legal cases and there are challenges with upholding the correct single space exemptions, how can we work together across the UK? Because my anxiety about the way the government or the Conservative Party has sort of come into this debate today is that, I mean, it's a gift for nationalists. And so ironically, a party that's meant to be the Conservative and Unionist Party has just given the SNP another kind of grievance
and I completely disagree with that. If anything, this is one of the most popular things that we did in Scotland, where Scottish people felt that their own government was doing the wrong thing. That's the first time...
They had passed the law. That's what devolved government means, doesn't it, Kemi Baden? Not that you should be able to pass legislation. It was blocked by Westminster successfully, I grant you. But the question of it being a reserved matter, which means that devolved governments could not introduce legislation as they tried to do in terms of gender recognition or self-identification, you're going to stop that with your proposal?
Yes, Jo, because you can't have a woman being one thing in Scotland and something different in England. You cannot have that. You cannot have that. And we must remember why we are doing this. It's not because the Conservative Party, as Wes says, wants to do it. We had 100,000 people sign a petition for this. We have women crying out all over, lots of cases. The really harrowing letter I wrote about a woman being raped, in a toilet. We have those... just let me finish. We have, rapists being put in women's prisons and that being said to be legal. We can't just leave this and say, oh, well, we'll just put out some more guidance. We've put out the guidance. It's not working. People are going to court, endless tribunals. We need to settle this once and for all.
On the issue of it being a reserved matter, the proposal to make it a reserved matter so that devolved governments couldn't pass the sorts of legislation that Scotland did or the Scottish government did, do you support that or not?
Well, I think you've got to tread really carefully, and I think we'd want a more respectful relationship. And if we disagree with the SNP, the best thing to do is to take them on and vote them out in Scotland as well as UK-wide. I mean, look, my scepticism comes in. We see it kind of splashed across the front pages today. And I think we've seen, whether it's through this or national service, I think an attempt by the Conservatives to generate some debates which are not about the economy or the NHS or law and order and criminal justice, to move away from those issues where the Conservatives have an appalling record and no offer for the future of the country. And I do think, and I've argued for some time about the importance of protecting women's sex-based rights in law. I also think we should be...
But by working with the SNP and not really changing anything.
No,
because he hasn't answered the question. He hasn't said whether he agreed or disagreed.
No,
he just said, well, we'll just have to work, we'll just be nicer and hopefully everything will be OK. That is not a serious response to this issue. We need seriousness. And the Labour Party are not serious.
We do, but and I think it's sort of implied in your answer, I think this is about creating more dividing lines and stoking kind of controversy rather than finding solutions.
Well, hang on. It's not just Wes Streeting and the Labour Party, because this is from a Conservative candidate, Elliot Coburn, who has tweeted, "Here we go again, wondered how long it would take." And this is above the Conservative Central Office saying, "We know what a woman is, Keir Starmer doesn't." Are you just stoking a debate that you think will win you votes amongst your core party faithful?
No. In fact, the people who are most in favour of this are women on the left. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has said this is something we should do. There's lots of opinion, lots of good, strong legal opinion that says this is a mess, the law is confused, and what we are doing is bringing clarity.
But what do you say to Elliot Coburn?
What I would say to Elliot Coburn is that we have an area where there is tension between protecting women and vulnerable children.
So why now? Why now, Kemi?
Because I've explained why now already.
You haven't explained why now. You've been Equalities Minister for 2 years. Why are you doing this now? If you said people have been crying out for this.
Because we had to deal with the gender recognition bill first. We had to deal with that first. We could not bring this legislation in. Let me finish. We could not bring this legislation in first. And there is a whole package of things that we have done. We've worked on gender questioning guidance for schools. We've dealt with mixed sex wards. There's a lot of stuff that we have done in this space. We have been working on this policy. And if there hadn't been a snap election, it would probably have been laid in September. But we're not going to throw that work away. It is going in the manifesto. And that is why now.
And look, just briefly, the way you set out your case on this programme was far more considered, and the tone in which you put it across was so different to that ridiculous tweet that Elliot Coburn has rightly challenged. And, you know, if this is the sort of debate Rishi Sunak's going to come to the debates with, he should be ready to answer, well, why is it, if you care so much about women's rights, that only 2.5% of their rapists see the inside of a courtroom, let alone the inside of a prison cell? Why is it so many women are suffering in childbirth and dying avoidably in childbirth? And why is it, even on a common condition like endometriosis, women are waiting around 8 years for a diagnosis? Those are issues that affect women too. This government has no record. And that tweet is just a total disgrace that even your own people are calling it out. We're sick of that.
I'll let you respond, and then I must come to my other guest.
That's not serious, is it? Your argument just earlier was serious. That tweet's a disgrace, isn't it?
But the truth is, all of the things that Wes has talked about, we are tackling. We had a women's health strategy, a rape action plan, and there are so many statistics I could trot out. I'm not going to do that. What I will say is that Labour are quite happy to put out silly tweets and nonsense, but they don't like it when the opposite happens. In politics, you'll have lots of people putting out funny memes.
So you do think that's a silly tweet?
It's part of the... No, they do silly tweets. I think it is true that Keir Starmer has flip-flopped endlessly on this issue, and that is becoming apparent.
It has been a difficult issue, hasn't it, politically, and the debate around it. And it hasn't been easy for Keir Starmer personally to talk about this, has it?
This is you're right, it's a very, very difficult issue. It's a very contentious issue, and it inflames lots of feelings on both sides. The way to deal with this is to listen to those arguments, and Keir Starmer has listened to arguments, and I've spoken to him about this a lot for my biography. He has listened to arguments, and he doesn't want this issue, and he doesn't want the very vulnerable people involved to be kicked around as a political football. I do think there's a great difference between Kemi saying, on the one hand, this is unnecessarily contentious, and then choosing to insert this into the white heat of a general election campaign as a wedge issue. Keir Starmer doesn't know what a woman is. Do you stand by that advert?
First of all, Tom, please don't point at me like that. I find it, it's unnecessarily aggressive. We're having a conversation.
I'm sorry.
We're having a conversation here.
But there are strong feelings about this.
But yes, there are. And, I have watched so many women vilified, people standing with signs, MPs standing with signs.
But on the question, Kelly, is it responsible to insert this issue in the white heat of an election?
Difficult things.
No, but even in an election,
is the time to do so, because then you get a mandate to do it. To not do it in an election, then you go back into power and people say, well, why didn't you put it in a manifesto? So it's very easy to say this is not the right time. This is absolutely the time to talk about things that we've been working on.
Kemi, without any finger jabbing at all, you've had 14 years to amend this legislation. It's a 14-year-old piece of legislation. Now, in an election campaign, which, according to polls, you're losing, you're choosing to insert this issue into it with these very, very divisive ads, which I haven't yet heard whether you agree with them or not. And I wonder whether you agree with that ad and think that's a good way of addressing this issue.
This issue has only really cropped up in the last few years. It hasn't been something that we were talking about 14 years ago. The Act only came in under a Conservative government despite it being passed by Labour.
All right.
Do I think that Keir Starmer knows what a woman is? I think he has given all sorts of different answers. Nobody knows. And I think that in an election, it is very justifiable for people to point out where we have different opinions.
All right,
Saying I think A and you think B is suddenly a wedge issue. We need to let people know where we stand on that, and it's up for the electorate to decide.
So it's
Kate, what do you think the motivation is for tackling the debate? Do you take sincerely what Kemi Badenoch has said? Or is it, as many commentators have remarked, part of appealing to a core vote along with national service and along with the pensioners' triple lock plus?
Well, I think two things can be true at the same time. That tweet, what is a woman, is sent out because the Conservative Party knows that Keir Starmer has struggled to answer that question. It is contentious. It is political. I also believe Kemi and Wes are completely sincere on this. And I think that the conversation that we just witnessed between the two of them for about 10 minutes was one of the most informative ones I've seen in this general election debate so far. I think this is what we've just seen is actually a very good reason to say this should be part of the election. And I agree with Kemi that this is a relatively new issue when it comes to just how contentious and just how political it has become. It makes sense to me that it would be discussed. Twitter is not the place to discuss anything. But what we just witnessed to me is the perfect example of why it is okay to bring up this topic in conversation. And especially around a general election where we're talking about something deeply serious, which is, as Wes said, that conflicting issue, which sometimes you unfortunately get between minority rights. It's really hard to talk about. Our politicians have to talk about it. And Wes and Kemi, I think, were just a perfect example of how you can do this in a general election.
The one thing I think has been missing is just a lot of the toxicity of this debate has created real and palpable fear amongst trans people about where they fit, whether they're going to be accepted, whether they belong. And I'm consciously, really acutely aware of this, in relation to, the Cass review, which actually I think was a really good
the Hillary
report.
Cass review looking at identity services
for children. Now, I think it was an
But
incredible.
you changed your mind, you
report.
said, about your view generally towards
Well,
it.
what I said I sort of really regretted was the campaigning approach that just said, get over it. Some people are trans, get over it. When actually I think there were lots of issues that needed to be worked through. And I want us to have, as a society, a much more healthier debate and conversation that seeks to heal division rather than to exploit and inflame division.
This is where we agree. This shouldn't be a party political issue. It should be a cross-party issue, but it is constantly being weaponised in that way. And hopefully we'll be able to move on and talk about, does this legislation work? How do we fix it?
At your
rather
word.
than
We'll move on.
what we're on tweets and so on.
Well, let's move on and have a look at this headline in BBC News. Diane Abbott says she intends to run and win for Labour. She has confirmed that she'll run as Labour's candidate in Hackney North and Stoke Newington, and it follows a row over whether or not the party would allow her to stand or whether she was going to be blocked. Are you pleased, first of all, Wes Streeting, that she's running?
Yeah, I'm glad this is resolved. And look, what made Diane Abbott's case different from, say, Jeremy Corbyn's case is that what she did was wrong and what she said was wrong, and it was right that there was a disciplinary process. She apologised immediately. Yeah. She's undergone anti-Semitism.
But it took 5 months to actually get there.
It did take a while, but look, and just take a step back more broadly, what Keir has tried to do with our disciplinary process is firstly make sure it's independent of political interference from politicians, but secondly, unapologetically high standards. And there are people who've been barred from being candidates at this general election from the left and the right of the Labour Party, because we have just come out of a parliament where people have caused by-elections because they can't keep their hands to themselves. They're Googling tractor porn. They're taking bungs from private lobbyists in journalist stings, I should say.
There certainly have been a high number of candidates who've had to sit as independents because on all sides of the House, I have to say. But can I just pick you up on one thing you said? It will draw a line under it, that the matter's been resolved, except that Diane Abbott tweeted this. In fact, it was a piece written by you, Tom. It says, Starmer on Abbott, I've actually got more respect for Diane than she probably realises. But Diane then tweeted, more lies from Starmer. It was quickly deleted, but this is the screen grab of what she actually said. There's clearly a lot of bad blood still from this tweet between Diane Abbott and Keir Starmer. Can that relationship be mended?
Well, I don't know if it was Diane that sent that tweet or whether it was someone mistakenly tweeting. In fact, it was deleted, I think, says quite a lot. Look, I feel confident that, this hasn't been a pleasant experience for anyone. And I feel confident that the conduct that saw Diane Abbott lose the whip and be suspended will not be repeated. That doesn't mean that Diane Abbott is not going to stop being Diane Abbott, and she will continue to disagree with us because the Labour Party has changed and we're not always on the same page. And look, she tweets on an almost daily basis to criticise something I've said about the NHS. But do I think and do I welcome her as part of the Big Ten? Absolutely, I do.
I mean, Tom, it was your article that Diane, well, certainly from her account, tweeted. Did Keir Starmer's praise of Diane feel authentic to you? It clearly didn't feel authentic to her, if you take that line from her tweet.
The conversation I had with him on Friday night when he's coming back on the plane from Scotland, he was really frustrated with the way this story had gone. I could feel that. He was infuriated by the briefing, by whoever it was, saying that she wasn't going to be allowed to stand. That hadn't been a decision taken. He was really, really sort of insistent on that. And he doesn't like that sort of thing. He doesn't like briefing by anonymous sources.
He is the leader of the Labour Party. Labour's national ruling executive. Well, it's a creature to some extent of him. I mean, there isn't that much distance, is there, between him and the ruling executive and their decision on whether she could stand or not?
No, look, I think the delay, as far as I can understand it from both sides a bit, was that there had been this conversation going on about whether she could sort of step down, come back into the parliamentary party, then step down and retire with dignity with lots of praise ringing around her ears. And I think that, to the extent there was a deal, I don't think it's ever formalised, but the extent to which there might have been a deal was wrecked by this anonymous briefing. And that really, really annoys Keir Starmer because he thinks it's unprofessional. He hates that sort of briefing. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's actually now made it clear he wants her to stand.
All right. Well, he has now, finally. Do you think it's cut through this with the public?
No, I don't, but I think it is still tricky for the Labour Party. Do I think whether or not Diane Abbott gets to stand as a Labour MP is going to dictate whether or not the Tories close in on the Labour Party by 10 points? No, I don't. But it is unfortunate to be running on a platform saying that you're going to end the chaos and to have so much chaos and, frankly, so much attention drawn to this point where you just really can't give a simple answer on what is essentially a very simple issue.
Right, well, let me just show you here also the candidates that we know so far who are also standing in Hackney North and Stoke Newington. You can see them on your screen, and I understand there'll be a full list available because the closing deadline is the end of the week. Now, Keir Starmer has been campaigning with his shadow Defence Secretary John Healey today, trying to put security and defence at the heart of this campaign, meeting prospective Labour, well, actually, they are Labour candidates, they're not prospective anymore, with a military background. You can see the pictures here. How is Keir Starmer trying to reshape, Tom, or remould the sort of candidates that are standing at this election for Labour?
I think standing on a platform with a bunch of veterans with medals who are candidates for the Labour Party in this election is a pretty vivid symbol of change. Certainly when you got it at the last election, I don't think. I mean, Labour's relationship with the armed forces has always actually been slightly better than people think. I remember John Reid, when he was Defence Secretary, used to say he loved being Defence Secretary because it's the only time he still called people comrade, you know. And, you know, there is actually quite a lot of sort of compatibility between, you know, public service and the idea of the Labour Party. And I think Labour are going to make a lot more of this over the next few weeks.
Right. I mean, it seems to be something that Keir Starmer personally wants to put forward, a break perhaps with Jeremy Corbyn, his predecessor, and actually to some extent taking the Conservatives on something that has been considered in the past, your territory.
It has, and that is for good reason. It is that because people believe that we are the ones who take defence more seriously.
Apart from the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, it seems.
Just look at the defence announcement on what we're going to spend, 2.5% by 2030. But what is more interesting is what Tom said, that you wouldn't have had that before. And that links to the Diane Abbott issue, that there's clearly a lot of unhappiness and tension in the backbenches of the Labour Party, so to speak. And Keir Starmer is trying to present, you know, a united front. I think it will fragment and shatter very quickly. There's all sorts of complaints, all sorts of issues. But this is politics. It happens in every party. What I resent is when Labour try and pretend that this is something unique to the Conservative Party when we have differences and that they are all harmonious. The Diane Abbott issue shows that that is certainly not the case.
Wes?
I mean, this has been a unique and extraordinary period in British political history, what we've seen since 2019. The chopping and changing of prime ministers, chancellors, cabinet ministers, the fact that there's a whole bunch of you who are running leadership elections ahead of the general election.
It's not true.
Rishi Sunak can't lead his party. He had no mandate from his party. And that's a fundamental difference here. And that's why you can see in the candidate selection, the shadow cabinet, the policy agenda, Keir Starmer won a mandate to lead the Labour Party, and he has led the Labour Party to the extent that. But Jeremy Corbyn isn't even a candidate for the Labour Party. He's standing against the Labour Party. That is the proof.
Still his party.
No, it's not. They've left.
That's why. Well, why is Diane Abbott calling Keir a liar?
Because
the
Labour Party has fundamentally changed. You look at the candidates who are standing this election. It is fundamentally different. There's no doubt about the fundamental change that Keir Starmer has led. And that's been Rishi Sunak's challenge. He's not been able to lead his party because he lost to Liz, who lost to the Lettuce, and he's never regained that ground. He's never had that mandate for change, and he's a prisoner of the Conservative
Wes is just being rude about the Prime Minister and Liz. The fact of the matter is that Keir Starmer has not removed many of the very problematic MPs that he has in his party. They're still there. And if Labour win general election, they're going to have a lot of power.
No.
There's so many things, so many foolish and silly things that we've seen Labour MPs come out and say, I did, a long thread, about 10 different things. You know, people like Absana Begum running out with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign just a few days after October 7th. So much of that. You look at the questions that people ask at PMQs, all unserious. They are not a serious party, and that is going to become increasingly apparent during the election.
Well, of course, Lucy Allen, who is standing down, was a Conservative MP in Telford, wanted to see reform as the candidate in her seat. I mean, party discipline is across the spectrum,
You've got a Tory candidate running as a Labour candidate.
He's not running as a Labour candidate.
In High Peak, Robert
He's
Largan
saying Labour people want him.
Hang on.
He is hugging the Labour brand close because yours is so toxic. And I just hope know people in High Peak remember John Pearce is the outstanding Labour candidate. Robert Largan should be done under the Trade Descriptions Act.
Since you brought up, he is the Conservative candidate, but Kemi, if you look at that, Labour for Largan, he is the Conservative candidate. He seems to be doing everything to disguise the fact.
But he's taken that screenshot is taken out of context. He has written stuff around it saying lots of Labour people want to support me. He talks about having reach across the political spectrum. It's very easy to crop all that out and just put that
there. No, there is a tiny little... hang on. And there's also reform for Robert
Yes, exactly.
Largan.
Maybe that's Farage's... That's going to be Farage's announcement.
What he's doing is saying that there are people from all parties who support him, and he has every right to do that.
And here are the candidates standing in High Peak in that seat so far. You can see them there on our screen. Since West Streeting raised it, I'll use you as the excuse to ask you about your leadership ambitions. Kemi Bain, are you running any sort of campaign? Have you been talking to any of your colleagues?
I ran in 2022 and I lost. And in October 2022, I supported Rishi Sunak, and I'm supporting him now. There is no vacancy. But this is one of the challenges that I have had, even as a Secretary of State. Not able to talk about the work that I'm doing because all the questions are you running for leader? Who's running for leader? Did you hear what Suella said? Did you hear what Liz said? There is a whole sort of bubble of Westminster nonsense that does not appeal to our constituents. I don't think we should be talking about any leadership contest. We should be talking about which party is best to run the country and then see what happens and what the people pick after the election.
But that's the manifestation of the chaos, I'm afraid, because Rishi Sunak isn't leading his party and because people make no secret of the fact that even if somehow he scraped through, he'd be out the door of number 10 because you'd all get rid of him. You get those sorts of questions, I'm afraid. This is the manifestation of the chaos. You could, of course, rule yourself out and then that would kill the questioning stone dead.
Yes, but I'm a Secretary of State and part of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, and I'm here to talk about what we are offering at the election.
Well,
Wes wants to talk about whether or not I'm running because I've put him in a very difficult position. What they don't have are serious answers to the difficult questions. Yes, we have seen a lot of turbulence over the last few years, but that is because external effects have been unbelievable. Look at what COVID did. Look at what Ukraine did. Can you imagine if Labour had been in charge during that period?
Well, let's ask one of the big questions.
They have no answers.
Well, you've talked about serious answers for the big questions. Well, one of the big topics that isn't being discussed is Brexit, which, of course, dominated. Why not, do you think, Kate?
I think Labour have done a good enough job of making clear that certain red lines will not be crossed, but that's why this story in the Eye is so interesting today.
Just show the headline.
Plans for a softer Brexit deal. The impression you get is that Labour want easier trade, they want fewer checks, but they're not going to cross the red lines of a customs union or a single market. It sounds very similar to what Rishi Sunak went to the EU to try to negotiate, and indeed did. He did get fewer checks. I think that the harsh reality for any government to come in is that the EU is not interested in political party. They're not even particularly interested in the characters that would be negotiating. They want to protect their single market. They've got those red lines, and all of Europe is dealing with illegal immigration. There is no way in the next 5 years you get a revised Brexit deal without immigration on the table.
I mean, Tom, you were involved in the People's Vote campaign. Would you like to see Brexit being discussed more fully in this election campaign by all the parties, or certainly the two main parties?
Yeah, I've always personally thought that Labour should come out and say much more boldly that Brexit has been a catastrophic error, an act of national self-harm, and more people are realising it. Now, Kemi...
Tell us what you really think. Hey?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Kemi has, her day job is Trade Secretary. You'll know that Brexit is harming our capacity to export to Europe. You know that. And, I think there are things that can be done. I think what Labour will say in this election...
I don't know that, actually, but
okay.
I think
I'll get your response in a minute.
Presumably
have access to some sort of data. I think what Labour will say in this election afterwards is, they don't want to revisit that incredibly divisive debate of which I was part. Maybe they're right. But what they can do is do stuff which is in the national interest, which the Tories won't do, because they're so sort of captured by the sort of ideological faction on the right of the party.
Well, let Kemi respond first of all to both those points. And a great act of self-harm, you just won't admit it, and the trade that has been done post-Brexit is no way equal to the trade that we've lost with our closest partner, EU.
So, first of all, this is based on a fallacy that most of the trade that we do is goods trade. Actually, it's exports trade. The UK is an 80% services economy, and services exports have been going back gangbusters. That's where most of our income comes from. Yes, goods exports have fallen, but that is something that is not unique to here and is not unique to the
fallen
EU.
quite substantially, hasn't it?
Because of COVID. We've had a
Nothing to do
serious
with
issue
Brexit.
in terms of supply chains over COVID. And one of the things that analysts will tell you is that because we left end of January 2020 and COVID started just a few weeks later, it's been mixed up what's actually happened. Of course, it is true that we have fewer exports to the EU,
but why?
with many countries like the ones that we've done trade deals with, they're going up.
Right.
We are now
But
the fourth largest
Kemi,
exporter
all right, Kemi Bainton, but
in the world. This is
that's
very
your line.
important.
But why isn't it
Tom
part
said
of the
it's been a
campaign? Why
disaster.
isn't it part of the campaign?
The campaign has just started.
Oh, right,
We're the
we are
fourth
going to talk
largest
about Brexit.
exporter in the world. We've overtaken Japan. We've overtaken France. This is despite Brexit. The fact of the matter is the people voted for Brexit. We as a government need to deliver it. We've left the European Union.
So you haven't delivered it yet, then?
Yes, no. I said we've left the European Union. The strategy now is to make sure that we get the benefits of it.
All right,
That's not a
but
one-year,
Kemi,
two-year strategy.
Kemi,
That is a 10-year, 20-year strategy.
Well, let Tom-
what will happen is Tom and Labour and Wes will say, oh, we need to go back, be going round and round in circles, back to square one.
Labour haven't
Cannot
said
happen.
that yet,
We've
but
got to
Tom-
look forwards.
Isn't
Got to
it,
look
a bit,
forwards.
isn't it a bit significant that your job is Trade Secretary, yet your first big intervention in the campaign is not to say our trade's going gangbusters and Brexit's a great success. Your first intervention in the campaign was to talk about trans issues.
Because
I'm
women
also
and
the
equality
Equalities
secretary.
Minister.
Yeah, okay.
I'm also the Equalities Minister.
You're
It
not
doesn't
talking about
matter whether
trade.
we do equalities first or trade
But she
first. We've
holds
already
both
had an
titles.
economic
I
announcement.
accept that.
All
but
right.
you-
Well, let me
you
bring
chose-
in.
you did
Yeah, but hang
choose
on.
which one
There's
you
a
went for.
challenge here to Labour too. Why aren't you embracing the idea of that closer relationship with Europe, talking about it with the EU? In broad terms, Labour have mentioned it, but not in specifics, and not actually taking on the idea that you might have to rejoin the customs union or the single market in order to get that relationship.
Well, so on the single market and customs union, that's because we're not going to make the same mistake we've seen actually during the referendum campaign, where Vote Leave made it all sound so simple and that there wouldn't be any consequences. Like, I spent 4 years on the Commons Treasury Committee. The idea of the UK being a rule taker is serious because, especially given the size of our financial services, it's a financial stability risk. It's not without risk and consequences or complexity. So we're not content to be rule takers. I hope we can press the reset button on our relationship with the European Union and have a more mature and grown-up conversation. But look, I'm afraid, there are consequences from leaving the European Union. That question has been settled by one referendum and 2 general elections. There is no point relitigating the past. And it is a reminder to voters at this general election that voting does matter.
Right.
It does change things. You want to see things change for the better, cast your vote for Labour at this general election. What we can't do, I'm afraid, is just slam on the reverse gear and pretend that if it would be easy to rejoin the customs union or the single market, it wouldn't. It would be easy to join the European Union, it wouldn't. And in fact, I think what people are desperate for is to draw a line under where we've been as a country on Brexit.
Tom, do you agree with that?
Positive relationship in the future.
Do you agree with that?
I mean, we used to talk about cherry picking in EU negotiations. I think there is now some low-hanging fruit of the stuff that Labour can do very quickly, whether it's a veterinary agreement, whether it's changing some of the visa rules. I do think at some point all incrementalism comes up against a cliff face, and I think there will be growing pressure on a new Labour government to do more and to go further than this, because public opinion is shifting at a rate of knots, and the view of business has shifted, and they really want further action.
But what do you mean by visas? Because Labour have decided to join the Tories, unfortunately, in being quite anti-immigration in this election. I think one of the most important outcomes of this general election, regardless of who wins and by whatever number of seats, is that we are going to discover what isn't just a party political issue, but the major fundamental crises facing the UK. That, again, if you are in the EU, if you are an official, it does not matter if you're Labour, it does not matter if you're Tory, you are going to keep your hard lines. I think the state of the NHS, I think so many crises that have been building for decades, it's going to become very obvious what was Tory infighting and what really wasn't, what was a consequence of the lockdowns that both major parties supported, what has been the consequence of not tackling the NHS and social care. This is going to be really hard stuff, and the same issues are going to face a potential new government as they did the old one.
Would you say Brexit's been a success so far?
I can point to major successes, including the vaccine rollout, but this is going to be something that develops over decades, and most importantly, is something that the Brits voted for.
Well, before we go, the BBC is launching something new. We're calling it Your Voice, Your Vote. It's an invitation to you to take part in our coverage. Tell us what's on your mind. Send us your questions by emailing us at bbcyourvoice@bbc.co.uk, and you can also contact us via our website and the BBC News app. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me on this Monday. We'll have more Politics Live, of course, with me tomorrow at 12:15. Bye-bye.